heavyweight Contender cornered McQueen in Detroit's most dangerous underground boxing ring and called him a Hollywood punk who wouldn't last 30 seconds against real fighters. What happened next would prove that reform school teaches lessons that professional training can't touch, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who learned to fight when losing meant more than just a trophy, it meant survival. When the bell rang in that blood-soaked basement, fists would settle everything that words couldn't. The crowd's bloodthirsty roar suddenly sounded like wolves circling wounded prey. If you want to witness the untold stories of Hollywood's most brutal battles, subscribe now. 1969, Detroit, Michigan. The basement of Murphy's Gym, where the real business of violence was conducted away from state athletic commissions, medical supervision, and anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about why men chose to beat each other unconscious for the entertainment of crowds who paid cash to watch authentic brutality rather than sanctioned sport. The underground boxing ring had been constructed from materials that could be disassembled quickly if authorities discovered the illegal contests that generated more money than legal sporting events could produce through ticket sales and betting action. Steel cables instead of professional ropes, canvas stretched over concrete instead of properly cushioned flooring, and lighting that cast harsh shadows across faces that had learned to appreciate violence as entertainment rather than athletic competition. This was neutral territory, where different kinds of fighting could be tested according to standards that eliminated variables like weight classes, protective equipment, and rules designed to prevent permanent damage to participants who understood that permanent damage was the point rather than something to be avoided through careful regulation of acceptable techniques. The air hung thick with cigarette smoke, stale beer, and the metallic scent of blood that had been spilled here by men who'd brought their personal conflicts to places where those conflicts could be resolved through methods that left no ambiguity about whose approach to violence was more effective when civilized options were no longer available. The crowd surrounding the ring represented Detroit's underground economy, auto workers seeking entertainment that matched the brutality of their daily labor, small-time criminals who understood violence as business tool, and gamblers whose livelihood depended on accurately assessing which kind of toughness would prove superior when tested under conditions that eliminated everything except raw capability and willingness to absorb punishment while inflicting superior damage. Tonight's main event had been arranged through channels that operated outside official boxing organizations, bringing together participants whose backgrounds couldn't be adequately represented through conventional athletic records or professional rankings that measured success according to sanctioned competition rather than authentic capability, when that capability was tested by people who understood that some contests were settled through methods that formal sport couldn't adequately simulate. Tommy the Hammer Rodriguez, 28 years old, stood in his corner like a monument carved from muscle and controlled aggression. A legitimate heavyweight contender whose professional record included victories over ranked opponents, Rodriguez had been barred from title contention due to incidents outside the ring that had demonstrated his understanding of violence as personal expression, rather than merely professional requirement. His massive frame carried power that had been developed through years of dedicated training with coaches who understood that championship-level boxing required systematic preparation that transformed natural ability into mechanical precision, capable of ending fights through single punches delivered with accuracy that professional opponents couldn't defend against effectively. But Rodriguez's presence in underground venues reflected his preference for contests that eliminated restrictions designed to protect participants from consequences that professional boxing attempted to minimize through rules that prioritized participant safety over authentic determination of superior capability when that capability was measured without limitation. His reputation in Detroit's underground scene was built on demonstrations that proved professional training could be applied to situations where professional rules didn't exist, where medical supervision wasn't available, and where victory was determined by willingness to continue fighting when continuing seemed impossible. But surrender meant accepting permanent status as someone who'd been proven inadequate when tested according to standards that professional sport couldn't adequately represent. Steve McQueen, 39 years old, entered the basement like someone who understood that he was walking into territory where celebrity status would provide no protection and screen reputation would mean nothing except what could be backed up through immediate demonstration of authentic capability. when that capability was challenged by people who measured toughness according to practical rather than theoretical standards. Fresh from completing Bullet, where his pursuit of authentic action sequences had established new standards for physical performance by actors who refused to rely on stunt doubles or special effects to create believable portrayals of dangerous situations, McQueen approached this underground contest with the same obsessive attention to authenticity that characterized his professional work. His presence in Murphy's basement wasn't accidental or recreational. Word had spread through Detroit's entertainment community that Hollywood's most famous rebel was in town for automotive research related to upcoming racing films, and Rodriguez had publicly challenged McQueen's credentials as someone who could handle real rather than choreographed violence. The challenge had been delivered through intermediaries who understood that direct confrontation between professional fighters and entertainment industry celebrities required careful orchestration to ensure that both participants understood the stakes and accepted responsibility for consequences that couldn't be undone through legal agreements or insurance policies designed to protect valuable assets from permanent damage. McQueen's pale blue eyes scanned the basement environment with tactical awareness that suggested he was measuring everything according to lessons learned in places where being tough meant surviving circumstances that would have eliminated people who'd never been tested by genuine rather than simulated danger. His compact frame showed none of the obvious muscular development that characterized Rodriguez's professional conditioning, but carried the kind of functional strength that came from years of motorcycle racing, stunt work, and physical challenges that had taught him to calculate risks according to consequences that could include permanent disability or death rather than just professional embarrassment or temporary setbacks. "Look what wandered down from Hollywood," Rodriguez announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying authority that had been earned through years of proving his superiority over opponents who'd underestimated what professional heavyweight training could accomplish when applied by someone who understood violence as personal expression rather than merely athletic performance. "Tommy Rodriguez," McQueen replied quietly, acknowledging the heavyweight's reputation while maintaining the kind of controlled calm that suggested he wasn't intimidated by physical advantages that would have discouraged most civilians from accepting challenges that professional fighters issued to prove their superiority over entertainers who played tough characters without understanding what authentic toughness required. "You know what I see when I look at you, movie star? I see another Hollywood punk who thinks playing tough guy in movies makes him tough enough to handle real fighters in real situations, where there ain't no stunt coordinators or safety nets to protect pretty boys from consequences that leave permanent marks." The insult was delivered with casual cruelty that made everyone present understand they were witnessing more than athletic competition. This was cultural examination of different sources of masculine authority, different definitions of what authentic toughness meant, and different approaches to violence that served completely different purposes for completely different kinds of men. "And what do you think real fighting looks like?" McQueen asked, his tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than defensive challenge. "Real fighting looks like systematic destruction of opponents through superior technique, conditioning, and understanding of how human bodies respond to specific kinds of punishment, delivered with precision that eliminates variables except pure capability and willingness to absorb damage while inflicting superior damage in return." Rodriguez stepped closer, his movement creating psychological pressure that made spectators understand they were about to witness demonstration of professional capability applied to a situation where professional rules wouldn't protect anyone from consequences that professional boxing attempted to minimize through careful regulation. "I've spent 15 years learning how to hurt people efficiently, how to absorb punishment without allowing it to affect my ability to deliver decisive strikes, how to maintain focus when pain makes rational thought impossible. That's real fighting, movie star. Everything else is just choreographed entertainment designed to look dangerous while keeping everyone safe." "And you think my background didn't include real fighting?" "I think your background included playing tough guys for cameras while real fighters like me were learning how to end conflicts through methods that leave no ambiguity about whose approach to violence is more effective when tested under conditions that eliminate everything except authentic capability." McQueen nodded with understanding that came from recognizing legitimate credentials, even when they were being used to challenge his own authenticity. Different kinds of training for different kinds of situations. Maybe. But only one kind of training serves situations like this. The basement crowd pressed closer to the improvised ring, understanding that they were about to witness contests that would determine more than individual superiority. It would establish whether professional athletic preparation was more valuable than survival experience earned through circumstances that couldn't be simulated through any training that didn't involve genuine risk of permanent consequences. You really want to test professional boxing against whatever kind of fighting they taught you in Hollywood? Rodriguez asked, beginning to remove his shirt with movements that revealed muscular development that represented years of systematic conditioning designed to maximize power, speed, and endurance according to scientific principles that eliminated inefficiency in favor of mechanical optimization. They didn't teach me how to fight in Hollywood, McQueen replied, also preparing for physical confrontation through adjustments that looked less impressive but somehow more ominous than Rodriguez's obvious displays of athletic conditioning. Where'd you learn? Reform school, military service. Street fights in factory towns where losing meant accepting permanent status as someone who could be victimized by anyone willing to test whether your reputation was based on actual capability or just carefully maintained mythology. The confession carried weight that made Rodriguez understand he wasn't facing typical Hollywood celebrity who could be intimidated through displays of superior athletic preparation, but someone whose toughness had been earned through circumstances that professional boxing couldn't adequately simulate through controlled training environments. Reform school fighting against professional heavyweight training. Rodriguez mused, understanding that this contest would test fundamental questions about different sources of masculine capability. Let's see which one serves real situations better. The improvised ring became center of attention as both men prepared for contests that everyone recognized as potentially dangerous for participants, whose different approaches to violence would be measured according to standards that eliminated everything except authentic capability and willingness to continue fighting when continuing seemed impossible. But surrender meant accepting defeat that couldn't be reversed through appeals or rematches. Rodriguez moved into fighting position with textbook professional form, stance optimized for power generation, guard position to provide maximum protection while maintaining offensive capability, footwork that demonstrated years of training with coaches who understood boxing as science rather than merely instinctive response to threats. McQueen's preparation looked less formal but somehow more threatening. Natural readiness that suggested comfort with situations where formal technique was less important than psychological commitment to continuing regardless of consequences that might result from refusing to quit when quitting seemed rational. 3 rounds, no rules except no weapons, announced the makeshift referee, understanding that formal regulations would be irrelevant in contests designed to determine whose approach to violence was more effective when tested without limitation. Fight ends when someone can't continue or doesn't want to continue. The bell rang with sound that echoed through basement like gunshot, followed by immediate explosion of movement, as both men discovered what their different approaches to combat would produce when tested against each other, under conditions that eliminated variables except raw capability and willingness to absorb punishment while inflicting superior damage. Rodriguez opened with professional combination designed to establish distance and test McQueen's defensive capabilities through systematic probing that would reveal weaknesses that could be exploited through superior technique applied with precision that amateur fighters couldn't match through instinct or desperation alone. But McQueen moved inside Rodriguez's reach while absorbing initial strikes, demonstrating immediately that his approach prioritized closing distance rather than maintaining safe range, accepting punishment in order to deliver damage from positions where professional boxing technique became less relevant and survival instincts determined outcomes. The exchange that followed challenged every assumption about athletic preparation and street credibility, about professional training and survival experience, about systematic conditioning and natural toughness that had been earned through circumstances that professional sport couldn't adequately represent through controlled competition. Rodriguez's punches carried power that had been measured scientifically and proven effective against ranked professional opponents, delivered with accuracy that eliminated wasted motion while maximizing impact according to principles that had been refined through decades of systematic study of human anatomy and mechanical efficiency. McQueen's responses looked less polished but somehow more efficient, each movement serving purposes that transcended immediate tactical advantage to reach strategic territory, where endurance and psychological commitment mattered more than technical superiority or athletic conditioning that served professional requirements rather than survival necessities. The first round continued with intensity that made spectators understand they were witnessing authentic violence between people whose toughness represented completely different philosophies about what violence should accomplish and how it should be applied when circumstances demanded decisive resolution of conflicts that couldn't be settled through other methods. Blood appeared early and frequently as both men discovered that their different approaches to combat produced different kinds of damage that served different purposes according to different definitions of what victory meant when victory was measured through continued capability rather than point accumulation or referee intervention. Rodriguez fought like someone who had learned to dismantle opponents systematically through superior conditioning and technique, breaking them down through accumulated damage that would eventually overwhelm their ability to continue defending themselves effectively against assault that combined power with precision in ways that amateur fighters couldn't match. McQueen fought like someone who had learned that survival meant outlasting opponents who might possess superior technique, but lacked the psychological commitment to continue when the cost of continuing exceeded rational assessment of potential benefits that victory might provide. The bell-ending round 1 found both men marked by combat but neither significantly disadvantaged, proving that professional preparation and survival experience could produce different but equally legitimate approaches to violence that served similar purposes through completely different methodologies. Between rounds, Rodriguez received advice from cornermen who understood professional boxing as systematic application of proven techniques designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing risk of permanent damage to valuable athletic investments. McQueen sat alone, drawing on internal resources that had been developed through encounters where corner advice wasn't available, and survival depended on personal rather than external sources of guidance about how to continue when continuing seemed impossible. The second round began with increased intensity as both men understood that decisive action was necessary to prove whose approach to violence was more effective when tested under conditions that eliminated protective variables that formal sport provided through rules and supervision designed to prevent permanent consequences. Rodriguez escalated his assault through combinations that demonstrated why he'd been considered legitimate contender for professional championships, applying systematic pressure that was designed to overwhelm McQueen's defenses through superior technique and conditioning that amateur fighters couldn't match through desperation alone. But McQueen's response revealed something that professional training couldn't adequately prepare opponents to handle: willingness to accept damage that would have discouraged fighters who measured costs and benefits according to career preservation, rather than immediate survival requirements that made rational calculation irrelevant. The basement crowd pressed closer as they witnessed contests that transcended entertainment to reach territory where authentic capability was being measured through methods that left permanent marks on participants whose different philosophies about violence were being tested according to standards that eliminated ambiguity about whose approach served real situations more effectively. After 6 minutes of brutal combat that proved both men possessed authentic rather than manufactured toughness, the contest reached a moment where decisive action would determine whose philosophy about violence was more practical when applied under conditions that professional sport couldn't adequately simulate through controlled competition. McQueen's opportunity came when Rodriguez attempted professional combination that required precise timing and distance management, techniques that worked effectively against trained opponents but created vulnerabilities when applied against someone whose responses hadn't been shaped by formal training that emphasized predictable patterns. The uppercut that ended the contest was delivered with timing that professional boxers couldn't anticipate because it emerged from survival instincts rather than systematic preparation, catching Rodriguez in position where his technical superiority became disadvantage that prevented effective defensive response to attack that violated conventional fighting methodology. Rodriguez dropped to the canvas with impact that echoed through basement like thunder, his professional conditioning unable to compensate for blow that had been delivered according to principles that formal boxing couldn't adequately address through rule-based preparation designed to handle predictable rather than instinctive responses to combat situations. The crowd erupted with appreciation for authenticity that transcended entertainment to reach territory where genuine capability had been demonstrated through methods that couldn't be faked or approximated through any preparation that didn't involve actual risk of permanent consequences for inadequate performance under pressure. McQueen stood over his fallen opponent with expression that carried no satisfaction or celebration, just professional confirmation that his approach to violence had been validated through testing that couldn't be disputed or explained away through appeals to different standards or alternative definitions of what authentic toughness meant when measured according to practical rather than theoretical criteria. Rodriguez recovered consciousness with understanding that he'd encountered something that professional preparation couldn't overcome through superior technique or conditioning. Accepting defeat that taught valuable lessons about different sources of authentic capability that served similar purposes through completely different methodologies. Hell of a fight, Rodriguez acknowledged, extending his hand toward McQueen with gesture that communicated respect earned through circumstances that couldn't be manufactured through publicity or assumed through reputation that hadn't been tested according to standards that eliminated pretense in favor of practical demonstration. Hell of a fight, McQueen agreed, understanding that both men had proven their authenticity according to different but equally legitimate standards that served different purposes for different kinds of men facing different kinds of challenges in different kinds of circumstances. The basement returned to normal function as venue where different approaches to violence could be tested and measured, having witnessed rare contests that proved authentic toughness came in various forms that could be equally effective when applied by people who understood their capabilities and limitations according to honest rather than wishful assessment of what they could accomplish when tested by opponents who possessed comparable but differently developed abilities. Subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's most brutal confrontations.